Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about human rights and government policy. So we have the NDP still going over the same ground, talking about the same things, but they have a new released plan about how they want to deal with Quebec and how things should be dealt with to preserve the French language and protect Francophone rights. The Liberal Party is still defending its position on some issues in the upcoming clips that we have about whether it's about Afghanistan or the pandemic or any of the issues at hand. And of course, the conservatives are asked a serious question about gun rights and the ban on assault weapons. In which case, kind of interesting that Erin O'Toole doesn't actually answer the question directly. He keeps stating policy and how they want to work with the police and things like that. So, and of course, the hot button issue is still going to be Afghanistan and those who were left behind. And I had to talk to a friend, a human rights activist, and has a charitable foundation that actually helps people with their human rights, Morganne Oger, and she's going to talk to us about, in a conversation about human rights and what might have been going on with the withdrawal of troops and what the mindset of a government could be while proceeding forward with trying to protect citizens, trying to protect troops, trying to protect the rights of all parties involved. So let's move forward and listen to what's going on. Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here. My name is Erin O'Toole, and I am proud to be the Liberal candidate for Mississauga-Malton. As the home of Pearson Airport and the first and final destination for many immigrants, this riding is home to so many success stories. I couldn't be filled with more pride standing here today to say that my father's is one of them. Born in a mud house, into a family with relatively little, he came to Canada at the age that I'm at now. He worked many odd jobs before becoming a plumber. The plumber worked day and night, saved every penny, and started a business. That business started in this riding in Mississauga-Malton, still calls the riding home today after 16 years. That same plumber was able to send his son to a great school. And that same son stands here today before you with his name on the ballot. I look forward to being the voice of this community for Canadians new and old. I look forward to working with community leaders to chart a path for the young people here. and I look forward to working hard, period, for all Canadians. We're joined here today by many distinguished personalities. We're joined by the Honorable Omar Al-Gabra, who has led a long and distinguished career in public service. Omar has worked tirelessly for the residents of Mississauga and of Peel, and I thank him for that. We also have with us the Honorable Anita Anand, whose work as Minister of Public Services and Procurement has been vital in getting Canadians through the pandemic. She has been a bright light during this trying time. Finally, we are joined by a fierce advocate for what is right, even in the face of opposition. I'd like to thank him for his tremendous leadership and commend him for his resilience against misguided forces. Thank you for being a role model, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau. Thank you. I'd like to invite Omar to the podium to say a few words.
Good morning. Thank you, Akwinder. Let me start off first by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And I want to echo what Akwinder said. Welcome to Mississauga. Let me just share the story with you. Prior to the pandemic, my friends and I used to argue whether government mattered in our lives, whether who is in government made a difference. But since the pandemic, that argument has been put to rest. Canadians saw firsthand what a difference it makes when a competent, decisive, compassionate government is in charge. They could compare it to other jurisdictions and they could see that our government was there to support Canadians. 1 out of 4 Ontarians benefited from CERP. 2.1 million jobs in Ontario were protected by wage subsidy. $1.8 billion saved small businesses and community organizations from bankruptcy. Canadians knew how important it was to have a government there for them. And while the opposition were filibustering or voting no confidence in our government was laser focused on acquiring vaccines for Canadians. And I want to take a moment to thank all Canadians who've rolled up their sleeves and got vaccinated. And I want to encourage those who are yet to be vaccinated to make their appointment as soon as possible. Vaccines are our best way out of the pandemic. Vaccines protect ourselves and our colleagues and our neighbors and our loved ones. Vaccines create safe workplaces, not only for those who work in them, but for their customers. And vaccines prevent against future lockdowns and help relaunch our economy. So with that, it is my honor now to introduce and ask my friend and colleague, Anita Anand, to come to the podium. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde, c'est un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. I want to say how happy I am to be joining you. I have to say, when I look at the bold and concrete plan in our platform, I couldn't be more proud to be a Liberal and part of this Liberal team. I first decided to run as a Liberal candidate in Oakville in 2019. 2 years ago. And at that time, no one knew that the pandemic would befall our country and our world. The Prime Minister appointed me to be the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, and I'm honored to hold the role. I had no idea that I would be responsible for procurement of multiple goods to protect Canadians during this pandemic. Our government has worked relentlessly to deliver for Canadians. We have climbed what I call 3 mountains. In the first mountain, we procured 2.5 billion items of PPE for our frontline healthcare workers. We made sure we put in place long-term contracts to deliver PPE over the course of months and years if necessary. And we also built up domestic production of PPE. Now 40% of our contracts by dollar value are with Canadian manufacturers. In the Second Mountain, we procured over 50 million rapid tests for the provinces and territories and Canadians at large. And in the Third Mountain, we secured the most diverse portfolio of vaccines of any country in the world. We ensured that those vaccines arrived before the end of July, 2 months ahead of schedule. How did we do that? We negotiated extremely hard, even after executing those contracts last August. We phoned our suppliers, we texted them, we emailed them, we were on it day and night because we knew that we needed to have Canadians' backs. That was my goal, that was our government's goal, and we were not settling for anything less than the best. In addition to ensuring that we are well prepared with vaccines here at home, we put in place contracts for boosters and any enhanced vaccine that may be approved by Health Canada so that anybody who needs a vaccine as recommended by NACI or other organizations, including provincial health officials, would have access to vaccines. And we didn't forget our commitment to the global environment either. We gave over 40 million vaccines to COVAX and contributed over $500 million. Why? Because our government believes in our global obligations as well as our obligations here at home. We are leading the G7, the G20, and the world in vaccine administration because we have Canadians' backs. And after all the progress that we have made, now is not the time to give up. Now is not the time to look away from the task ahead. We need to keep going because we cannot put in place the bold ideas in our platform, helping those who need a home, making sure we are addressing environmental degradation, keeping our economy resilient, making sure families have access to daycare. All of those bold and concrete ideas are so important for our country's future, but we need to end the fight against COVID-19 in order to put them into place. And that's what this government will do if re-elected, and this is what this Prime Minister will do for Canadians as a leader, and a leader that Canadians need now. And without further ado, it is my great honor, c'est un grand plaisir et honneur d'être ici avec lui, notre leader, Justin Trudeau. Merci beaucoup.
Bonjour tout le monde. Thanks, Anita. Anita has been our Minister of Procurement, but in other words, our Minister of Vaccines. Elle a travaillé très fort depuis le début de cette crise pour qu'on ait des vaccins. Elle s'est assurée qu'il y en aurait assez pour chaque Canadien. Anita, merci d'avoir toujours été là pour nous. Et ensemble, on a préparé le terrain pour une relance économique forte. A big shout out as well to two strong voices for here in Mississauga. Ickwinder, our next Liberal MP for right here in Mississauga-Malton, with an extraordinary, touching, but very, very Canadian story of getting to this point. And I look forward to seeing everything you're going to be able to accomplish for Mississauga-Malton and for the country in the coming years. And of course, Omar Al-Ghabra, a leader not just in this community, but as Minister of Transport in keeping Canadians safe. Omar, whether by standing up for what people in Mississauga need to weather this storm, or for workers in the industry, you've been leading the way forward, as always. Thank you, my friend. The last 18 months have been tough. And I know we're all looking forward to getting back to the things we love. Having your kids in school with their friends, reopening your restaurant to full capacity, and yes, taking a vacation with your family. We can get there. And the way we do is by finishing the fight against COVID-19 for good. Au moment où on se parle, les conseils de santé publique sont clairs. C'est mieux de ne pas prendre de vacances à l'étranger. Mais je sais qu'on a tous hâte de visiter nos amis, notre famille, de voyager d'un bout à l'autre de notre grand pays et, pourquoi pas, d'aller prendre un peu de soleil quand le froid va revenir. L'hiver dernier, on a dû prendre des décisions difficiles et travailler avec des compagnies comme Sunwing pour suspendre les vols vers l'étranger. C'était la bonne chose à faire pour protéger les gens. Mais en ce moment-là et depuis, vous avez fait votre part. You've gotten vaccinated. And for those who haven't, make sure you do. You've worn your mask. You stayed home. You canceled your plans. And now, you want to get back to what makes you happy and know that you're not at risk and that your kids are not at risk as you do so. Canadians stepped up. They did the right things. They made those sacrifices. They held strong for each other. And we're getting closer to the time where all that hard work and sacrifice will come to fruition. But in the last year and a half, it's been hard for Canadians to know what's safe and what's not. Clearly, it's a good idea to wear a mask in a busy place. It's the right thing to do to get your vaccine. What about the things we love that we haven't been able to do for a while? Well, when it comes to travel, we have a plan to make sure you don't have to wonder about the risks. We'll ensure that everyone 12 or older on a plane or train is fully vaccinated. So if you get on a plane like the one behind me today, you won't have to worry if the person beside you or across the aisle from your daughter has had both doses. You know they have. And with an airline like Sunwing, which has shown leadership on vaccination for all employees, you'll be covered when the staff come around to help with tickets or baggage too. You won't have to wonder about the risks. Now, Erin O'Toole has said he would rip up this commitment on vaccines. I think Canadians know that's precisely the wrong choice at the wrong time. Think about it for a second. Even as anti-vaxxers harass frontline healthcare workers, Erin O'Toole still won't even make sure his own candidates are vaccinated. And in fact, on healthcare workers, I want to say this. Do you remember when we were all going out every day to bang on pots and pans to show support for our extraordinary heroes on those front lines, to support them? Those frontline healthcare workers who were the only ones standing between us and the virus in those early days, working long hours, sharing stories of exhaustion and despair and hope at the same time. They inspired us to be there for each other as Canadians, to step up for each other the way they were fighting for us every day at a time where we didn't have vaccines. Well, now they need our help. Because even as they deal with rising cases in unvaccinated people, they're surrounded and being protested and being harassed and hassled and blocked by anti-vaxxers who are harassing them at the hospitals in BC and Ontario and right across the country. They need Canadians to come together once again in support of them, to defend our frontline heroes, to support science, and above all, to get vaccinated. And as leaders, we need to do everything we can. Erin O'Toole, and yes, Yves-François Blanchet too, say they respect the choice of anti-vaxxers. Well, you know what? I respect yours. You've worked too hard. We're too close to the finish line to let the Conservative Party take us backwards to more lockdowns and to a slower economic recovery for everyone. Ask people working for an airline like Sunwing or anyone who owns a family-run restaurant, and they'll tell you that people won't show up if they don't feel safe. And that's not good for business. It just goes to show that vaccines don't only matter because they protect you. They also matter because they get our economy on track to rebuild. Alors c'est vraiment important de continuer d'aller de l'avant avec les vaccins. La position de M. O'Toole, c'est pas seulement mauvais pour vous et votre famille, c'est mauvais pour l'économie. Here in Ontario, you've made it clear that you want a proof of vaccination system to keep you safe and to get everyone back to better days faster. Well, I'm right there with you. We'll even foot the bill for provinces and territories to roll out strong vaccination-proof programs, because that's real leadership, and that makes a real difference. It's no coincidence that right after we made that commitment, Premier Ford finally stepped up. And I think we all know that that wouldn't have happened with Erin O'Toole sitting across the table from Doug Ford. What Mr. O'Toole is doing isn't leadership. He's applying that same logic, one that's beholden to special interest groups, to his other choices as well, not just vaccines. Promising the gun lobby to make assault weapons legal again, and then misleading Canadians about his position. Allowing his MPs to introduce anti-choice legislation and standing by while over 80 members of his caucus restrict a woman's voice to choose. Ripping up a $10 a day childcare agreements that we've signed right across the country. None of that is leadership. And none of it will help us either finish the fight against COVID-19 or build a better Canada. Mes amis, cette élection est très importante. On a un vrai plan, ambitieux et positif, et on est prêt à le mettre en œuvre dès maintenant. On Wednesday, I laid out our plan to move forward for everyone on health, on housing, on childcare, on climate. We'll keep standing up on vaccines for travel, just like we'll make sure you can find a family doctor. We'll make owning a home more affordable. We'll keep fighting for $10 a day childcare, including here in Ontario, so that kids can get the best start, parents can better balance work and family, and our economy comes roaring back as strongly as possible. And we'll take real climate action. The consensus is clear. From economists like Mark Jacquard to environmentalists like Andrew Weaver, we have the best plan on climate and on jobs. On va continuer de prendre des mesures concrètes pour lutter contre les changements climatiques et pour créer des bons emplois pour les années à venir. On va vous aider à traverser cette crise et on va rebâtir un Canada encore plus fort. Il faut en finir avec la pandémie une bonne fois pour toutes, et pour ça, ça prend du vrai leadership. Nous, on va s'assurer que tout le monde qui prend un train ou un avion soit vacciné. On va prendre des mesures comme celle-là parce qu'on veut que vous soyez capable de recommencer à faire les activités que vous aimez et parce que ça va faire croître notre économie. On a fait beaucoup de chemin ensemble et je sais qu'on peut aller encore plus loin. On a une équipe expérimentée et on veut en faire encore plus pour être à la hauteur de vos ambitions. Mes amis, on est prêts à continuer d'avancer. The choice Canadians have to make in this election will take us through not just the next few years, but the next few decades. They matter. And I'm ready for the hard work. I'm ready for the hope. I'm ready to move forward for everyone. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. We'll start the question period for 20 minutes. One question, one follow-up. Une question, une sous-question, starting with CBC.
Mr. Trudeau, Travis Damraj, CBC News. Thanks for taking our questions this morning. You say the process was rigorous to clear Raj Saini, but the process was that Saini engaged an HR consultant to do the workplace assessment, and that did not include interviewing the complainant. How is that rigorous, and can you say with absolute certainty that you know the multiple allegations against Mr. Saini to be false?
I think Canadians know that we have always acted decisively on showing that we don't tolerate sexual misconduct or harassment. Not only that, we acted to put in place much stronger, more rigorous processes in Parliament, within our party, and within organizations across the country. We will always make sure that we are standing up for people's rights and supports for them as they come forward to be heard, to make sure that there is a process for them to follow. We will make sure that that process is rigorously and independently followed. Okay. Les gens savent très bien que j'ai toujours agi pour démontrer mon intolérance pour l'harcèlement et l'intimidation. Non seulement ai-je agi dans différents cas au fil des années, mais j'ai agi pour transformer et améliorer les processus à l'intérieur du Parlement, à l'intérieur de nos partis, à l'intérieur des lieux de travail à travers le pays. Oui, il reste encore plus à faire, mais on va toujours s'assurer qu'on est là pour écouter et entendre ceux qui s'avancent avec des préoccupations ou des histoires d'actes inacceptables. Et on va s'assurer qu'il y ait un processus indépendant et rigoureux par lequel ils vont pouvoir passer.
Following up.
Mr. Trudeau, your answer didn't address the core of the question, but I do want to ask you about another subject. In 2015 and 2019, your platform pledged to lift the blood donation ban on men who have sex with men. That promise is absent from this platform, and Marcy Ian, your candidate in Toronto Centre, said just yesterday, quote, "I'm not even going to begin to defend this." If you are re-elected, will you lift the ban, and if so, when?
We have said consistently, you're right, back since 2015, that the ban on blood donation, on giving blood for men who have sex with men, is unacceptable, discriminatory, and wrong. We made a commitment in 2015 to lift it. And we turned to Independent Blood Services Canada to say, okay, you need to get rid of that. And they said, we had all our research and funding cut by the previous Conservative government, so we don't have the data based on which to make that decision. So we funded the data. We funded the research they needed to make that decision, and we watched that decision go down from 5 years to 1 year to 3 months. And we are very, very hopeful, and we expect Canadian Blood Services to announce soon that ban, the MSM blood ban, will be lifted shortly. It is something that we are working on, continue to work on, and something that we will ensure happens.
Prochaine question.
Oui, bonjour, M. Trudeau, Laurence Martin, Radio-Canada. Le chef conservateur a dit aujourd'hui qu'il maintiendrait l'interdiction des armes d'assaut. Par contre, il ne dit pas s'il va financer un programme de rachat d'armes ou si les propriétaires actuels pourraient conserver leurs armes. Votre réaction, s'il vous plaît?
Son manque de clarté sur cet enjeu-là est malheureusement typique d'un chef qui dit une chose aux groupes d'intérêts spéciaux, que ce soit les groupes anti-choix, que ce soit le lobby des armes à feu, que ce soit ceux qui nient les changements climatiques, et il essaye de dire le contraire aux Canadiens. Il dit que non, c'est pas dans sa plateforme qui va bannir, qui va renverser notre interdiction des armes d'assaut. Et techniquement, c'est vrai qu'il dit ça parce que qu'il dit pas ça parce qu'il dit qu'il va renverser la décision que nous avons prise pour bannir ces armes d'assaut. Donc, il dit quelque chose dans la plateforme que l'ordre en conseil du 20 mai 2020 va être retiré, puis c'est justement cet ordre-là qui a interdit les armes d'assaut partout au pays. Sur quelque chose, un enjeu si important pour tant de Canadiens qui disent ce qu'il va faire. Et ce qu'il va faire, noir sur blanc dans sa plateforme pour le lobby des armes à feu, c'est qu'il va renverser notre décision de bannir, d'interdire les armes à feu de style assaut militaire. C'est tout à fait irresponsable. I think what we have here is a very concrete example of something that we see consistently from Erin O'Toole. He says one thing to special interest groups, whether it's anti-choice groups, or anti-vaxxers, or climate deniers, or the gun lobby, and then he tries to tell Canadians the exact opposite. He says very clearly on page 90 of his platform that he will reverse the May 2020 order in council by this government, the one that bans military-style assault weapons in this country. He will reverse our move to make it illegal to buy, sell, or use assault weapons in this country. And he got caught saying one thing to his friends in the gun lobby, and it's opposite to Canadians. That's not the kind of leadership Canadians need to finish this pandemic, to get our economy going again, or to move forward on things that matter deeply to Canadians, like gun control.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Plus tôt cette année, à Rivière-des-Prairies, à Montréal, une fusillade a tué 3 hommes et a gravement blessé 2 autres. Et dans un centre commercial en banlieue d'Ottawa, 2 personnes ont été tuées et des clients ont été terrifiés lors d'une fusillade. Earlier this year, a shootout in an apartment building left 3 men dead and 2 others seriously injured in the Rivière-des-Prairies neighborhood of Montreal. 2 people were shot and killed at a suburban Ottawa strip mall, terrifying shoppers who found themselves in the line of fire. And there have been more than a dozen gang-related homicides and 20 attempted murders in Vancouver so far this year. We're in the midst of a pandemic, but it does not mean that crime took a break. Our heart goes out to the families of the victims we lost so suddenly and tragically to acts of senseless violence this past year. But these stories are becoming all too commonplace in a country as free and as safe as ours. Depuis que les libéraux sont au pouvoir, la violence des gangs de rue a augmenté. Les homicides ont augmenté de 20%. C'est en grande partie à cause de l'augmentation de la violence des gangs de rue. Seuls les conservateurs ont un plan pour agir contre la violence des gangs de rue. Seuls les conservateurs vont garder les armes à feu loin des criminels violents. On va cibler les responsables de la violence et ceux qui terrorisent les gens. Pour ce faire, on va renforcer nos lois, en plus de donner les ressources nécessaires à nos services de police. Gang violence has increased dramatically since the Liberals took office. In fact, since they took office, homicides have risen by 20%. Driven in large part by an increase in gang violence across the country. Only Canada's Conservatives have a plan to combat gang violence and keep guns out of the hands of violent criminals. We will go after the people behind the violence that is terrorizing so many by toughening up our laws and giving the police the resources they need. We will amend the criminal code to make it easier for police and prosecutors to go after gang networks and prevent unauthorized imports of guns. Too many gang recruits, especially young people, are forced into the cycle of violence because there is no other option for them. Pour créer une stratégie de sortie des gangs, on va former des partenariats avec des employeurs du secteur privé. Ce programme va permettre aux membres des gangs de rue de s'en sortir, de refaire leur vie, de trouver un bon emploi et d'obtenir le soutien pour quitter une vie de crime. Et on va former des partenariats avec des organisations pour développer des programmes qui aident à sortir les jeunes des gangs de rue. On va s'attaquer à la criminalité des gangs les rues de Montréal et dans les grandes villes canadiennes. We will partner with employers in the private sector to create a gang exit strategy. The program will give them a way out, allowing them to start fresh in a new location with gainful employment and the support needed to leave behind a life of crime. And we will partner with organizations across the country to develop and expand programs to keep our youth out of gangs. Ending gun and gang violence needs to end at the source. We need to get tougher on gun smugglers. Pour stopper la contrebande illégale d'armes à feu à la frontière, on va travailler avec l'ASFC, la GRC et nos alliés américains. We will work with the CBSA, RCMP, and American allies to target smuggling operations before illegal guns even reach our border. And we will impose a mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years for the unauthorized possession of a firearm if the person was the subject of a prohibition order or previously convicted of a firearms-related offense. Les gangs de rue sont prévenus. Comme Premier ministre, je vais toujours être du côté des familles, des honnêtes citoyens et des victimes. Ensemble, on va agir pour rendre nos communautés, nos quartiers et nos rues plus sécuritaires. We are putting the gangs on notice. As Prime Minister, I will always stand on the side of law-abiding citizens and victims. Together, we can make our communities safer and secure our streets. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions. We will now be taking questions. First question.
Mr. O'Toole, good morning. Omar Sachedina from CTV News. Can you please clarify your position on assault weapons? In the debate last night, you said you will maintain a ban on assault weapons, but your platform says you will also repeal an assault-style firearms ban brought in last year. So which is it? Will you repeal the assault ban or will you maintain it?
We will maintain the ban on assault weapons. We will also, as I said today, work with police on gang violence, which has gone up incredibly over the last few years, and target the illegal smuggling of firearms. If you speak to police and law enforcement, the increase in violence in our cities is driven by organized crime, by street gangs using illegally smuggled firearms. We will go after it. On va maintenir l'interdiction sur les armes d'assaut. Et en plus, on va travailler en étroite collaboration avec les policiers, avec l'Agence des services frontaliers pour stopper la contrebande. Et c'est un problème grave avec les gangs de rue et la violence dans nos grandes villes, à Montréal, à Vancouver.
As another question, PHAC is releasing modeling data this afternoon on COVID cases, and I know you've said in the past that it's irresponsible to call an election right now during a pandemic, but now that we're in one, do you have a contingency plan for campaigning? Is there a threshold, a certain number of cases that Canada needs to get to before you say, okay, we're going to campaign virtual only?
That's a very good question. In fact, we should not be in a campaign. Only Mr. Trudeau wanted this campaign for his own personal interests. And last night, he threatened another election if he doesn't get his way with this one. Canadians deserve better than that. We have a plan to very carefully monitor public health guidance. As you know, we have a studio that we've used in part to make sure that our campaign is always ready to have a hybrid I want to meet as many people as possible to talk about our recovery plan, but we have to make sure that public health and safety is paramount. On doit avoir une campagne sécuritaire en pleine d'une pandémie. C'était une mauvaise décision par le Premier ministre et hier, il a menacé de déclencher une autre élection s'il n'aime pas les résultats. C'est inacceptable. Les Canadiens méritent mieux. On va avoir une campagne sécuritaire avec notre tournée sur le terrain, mais aussi avec notre studio, et on va suivre les règles sanitaires à travers le pays.
Prochaine question.
Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. Monsieur O'Toole, je veux revenir sur la question de l'interdiction des armes d'assaut. J'aimerais préciser un ou deux éléments. D'abord, est-ce que vous vous engagez à financer un programme de rachat pour ces armes-là? Et est-ce que vous allez obliger les propriétaires à les rendre?
Comme j'ai dit, on va maintenir l'interdiction sur les armes d'assaut et on va travailler avec les policiers et avec un processus transparent sur la sécurité publique, en ce qui concerne les armes à feu, mais aussi avec la frontière et les gangs de rue. On doit avoir une approche stratégique contre la violence parce qu'on a vu une augmentation des crimes violents dans nos grandes villes. As I've said, we will maintain the ban on assault weapons, and we will make sure that we work with police and we work to make sure that there's a transparent process to keep people safe and to make sure that we tackle rising gun violence, particularly through organized crime and gangs. We need to stop the smuggling and have a process to do that.
Donc, est-ce que je dois comprendre de votre réponse que vous ne mettrez pas en place un programme de rachat pour les armes?
Comme j'ai dit, on va maintenir l'interdiction sur les armes d'assaut et on va avoir un processus transparent sur la vérification, la formation, les licences pour les armes à feu, parce qu'on doit cibler les gangs de rue, la contrebande, parce qu'on a vu une augmentation des crimes violents à cause de ça. On va avoir une approche efficace, ciblée sur les gangs de rue et la sécurité publique.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. David Jungren from Reuters. On another topic of interest, if you become PM, would you ban your backbench legislators from bringing forward private members' bills that would in any way restrict a woman's right to abortion?
I've said many times I'm pro-choice, and I will be a pro-choice Prime Minister that always defends the right of women to make the decisions about their health decisions themselves and to guarantee access across the country, and there will be no erosion of that right.
When you say guarantee, would you be prepared to follow in the Liberals' footsteps and promise to bring in legislation to enforce that guarantee of equal access across the country?
As I've said, I'm pro-choice, and I will make sure that that access is there. It's important that women can access their rights in any part of this country. As I've said, I will try and make sure that we work together as premiers to make sure that access is consistent across the country.
Next.
Je vais travailler en étroite collaboration avec tous les premiers ministres sur la santé des femmes et sur l'accès à l'avortement. C'est un droit et comme un chef pro-choix, je vais toujours défendre les droits des femmes de choisir pour elles-mêmes, d'une nation à l'autre.
John Iverson, National Post. Earlier in the campaign, you proposed that when companies go bankrupt or are restructured, that workers would come first, not corporate elite. Back in 2019, you said something completely different when a similar proposal came from the Bloc, and you said that kind of super priority would have the perverse effect of making things worse based on your experience as a corporate lawyer. On this and on the defunding of CBC English TV, you appear to have changed your tune due to political expediency. Can Canadians trust you to live up to your promises?
Absolutely, John. In fact, there's probably been no member of Parliament speak more about pensioners at risk than me. My father worked at General Motors, and I know many people, when the auto industry was in trouble, worried about the underfunded pension. So I put forward a number of proposals, and to make sure that we save those pensions. I've said that pensioners' access to their security in retirement should come before corporate bonuses and payments for people that are restructuring the company, or in some cases, caused the problem in the first place. We saw that with Sears. We saw that with many other companies. So whether it's super priority, whether it's restructuring and having a guarantee fund like the Ontario government did, we're going to make sure that pensioners are protected.
Next question.
John Ibbotson, Globe and Mail. The Liberal government has signed subsidized $10 a day childcare agreements with most provinces. Your childcare plan is very different. If you were to form government, would you or would you not cancel the existing agreements with the provinces?
As I've said last night, we will work collaboratively with the provinces to make sure that our plan can be implemented while respecting the approach they have in each province. Quebec has had a very effective system for 20 years in the province, and I've said I'll meet with premiers immediately in my first 100 days to talk about health, talk about the well-being of families. Our child care plan puts families in the driver's seat to give them as much flexibility and help as possible right away, all families. We'll also help lower-income families the most with up to 75% of the cost covered. Our plan is more universal and gives all families support and flexibility. On va travailler en étroite collaboration avec tous les premiers ministres sur les programmes importants pour leurs citoyens. La garderie, la santé, je vais avoir une réunion dans mes premiers 100 jours avec les premiers ministres et je vais coordonner notre approche sur la garderie avec toutes les provinces avec de respect. Et on a une approche qui va aider toutes les familles québécoises, canadiennes, sur la garderie avec plus de flexibilité et avec plus d'argent pour les familles à faible revenu.
Yes, but the question was, would you cancel the existing agreement with British Columbia? Would you cancel the existing agreement with Nova Scotia? Would you cancel the existing agreement with Quebec?
Let's be very clear. We're in a pandemic election, and in the weeks ahead of an election, Mr. Trudeau made moves on issues that he had done nothing on for 6 years. With respect to this issue, the Liberals have promised various things 8 or 9 times. We will deliver for all families support to make sure they have access to childcare wherever they are, and more support for families in the lower incomes. We will also build collaborative relations with the premiers. We have a Prime Minister who is picking fights almost daily with premiers. We need to work together for families, for seniors, for our healthcare system, and that's how I will have a federalism of partnership.
Next question.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole, Tom Perry, CBC. Will you cancel those deals with the provinces on childcare?
As I've said, Tom, we will work together to make sure that we can implement our plan and respect what the provinces are doing. Mr. Trudeau has delivered nothing in 6 years. And in fact, what he's been saying a few weeks before an election would only take effect in 5 or 6 years from now. Our approach will help all families. It will give the most flexibility to put parents in the driver's seat, given the uncertainty coming out of COVID, and we're going to help with up to 75% for lower-income families, and we will coordinate that with the provinces and their approaches to childcare.
And you say you're going to maintain the ban on assault weapons. Are you going to ban all the weapons the Liberals say they will ban? And what's going to happen to them? Are you going to buy them back?
I'll repeat, we're going to maintain the ban on assault weapons. We're also, as I announced today, going to actually stop the illegal smuggling of American firearms into Canada. And if you speak to police, this has fueled the gang violence that has increased by 20% under Mr. Trudeau. So his approach is not working. He's actually lowering penalties for people that use firearms in committing or threatening violence towards other Canadians. That is not a way to keep Canadians safe. We're going to work with police. We're going to have a targeted program. We're going to divert people out of gangs, and we're going to finally stop this ocean of illegal smuggling into our country.
Next question.
Hey, good morning. Justin Ling, freelance. Mr. O'Toole, across the country throughout the pandemic, we've seen very different approaches to managing public health measures. Here in Quebec, there was a curfew for some 5 months. Other provinces have given police wild powers to stop people in public. I'm wondering, if you become Prime Minister and we see a new variant or another wave of the pandemic and you see these measures come back, will you play a more active role in asserting yourself to the provinces and telling them what they can, can't do, or should do to fight the pandemic?
Two important things. I will always respect and partner with the provinces, respecting their jurisdiction. But as Prime Minister, I will act on the border to keep variants out. I will act to make sure that we have domestic capacity for everything from masks to vaccines. The fourth pillar of Canada's recovery plan is making sure our country is ready. We were not ready under Mr. Trudeau. And the provinces had a much more difficult third wave because we were 4 months late with vaccines compared to peer countries like the US and the UK. That's unacceptable. So the federal government needs to do its job, I will, and have a partnership approach with the provinces. That's what the provinces want. Mr. Trudeau's called an election in the fourth wave, so you'll see that he'll always put his own interests ahead of the interests of Canadians.
I wonder, your party has for a long time talked about civil liberties, freedom. Are you saying you would not do anything to limit provinces' ability to lock people indoors, or, in the case of Quebec, as we talked about last night, to ban religious minorities from wearing their religious symbols? Are you no longer the party of freedom, as it were?
We're the party of freedom and respect. And part of that respect is respecting our Constitution, respecting provincial jurisdiction. And as I said, after 6 years of Mr. Trudeau, we have active separation movements in 3 parts of the country. We have people losing faith in Canada. We have a Prime Minister in an election he called in a pandemic attacking premiers at a time we should be working together. That will be my approach. In my engagement with Quebec, I've called it a federalism of partnership. That's what we need. Work together to keep Canadians safe, to secure our social programs, and to fight against the cost of living crisis. On doit avoir un fédéralisme de partenariat. C'est important. Et j'ai dit la même chose en anglais. Après 6 ans de M. Trudeau, on a plus de divisions et aucune opportunité pour nos jeunes. On doit travailler ensemble sur la santé, sur une relance économique et toujours respecter les champs des compétences. Je vais avoir une approche comme un partenaire, pas un paternaliste comme M. Trudeau.
Next question.
Good morning. Jacob Serban, Canadian Press. Mr. O'Toole, you've been quite clear that you're going to maintain the assault weapons ban. What would you say to Conservative supporters who are Conservative Party members who supported you during the leadership race when you said you would repeal that ban?
I've always said that Canada has an effective system of screening, training, and licensing for people that are hunters or sport shooters, and I've always disliked the fact that Mr. Trudeau tries to divide people on an issue of public safety. I don't. Today's announcement, we're going to go after the real risk here, which is criminal gangs and the illegal smuggling of firearms, something that has gotten worse under Mr. Trudeau, and we see that with a 20% increase in violent crime, with shootings in Montreal and Surrey and in Vancouver. I will focus resources on where it keeps communities safe and stop this process of dividing Canadians. I think we need a more transparent process so that people understand our system, and I don't like when Mr. Trudeau tries to import more American-style, misleading and divisive approach to this campaign. On a un système efficace pour la vérification et la formation pour nos chasseurs et nos tireurs sportifs, et on doit avoir plus de transparence pour ça. Je vais maintenir l'interdiction sur les armes d'assaut et cibler nos efforts sur les gangs de rue et la contrebande à la frontière. On doit travailler ensemble et respecter la sécurité des Canadiens.
On a different subject, last night you said that there needs to be reasonable accommodation for government employees who don't want to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Regarding travelers traveling within the country, flying or on trains, do they need to get vaccinated against COVID-19 before they travel?
In terms of the federal workers, what I've said is we need to have a system that keeps people safe. Focusing on vaccines, as you know, I'm a big proponent of vaccines. They're safe and secure. I want to encourage as many people as possible to get vaccinated. But for some people that won't be vaccinated, how can we use daily rapid testing and other measures to keep people safe? I will try and work with provinces, with organizations, to have an approach that's fair. And what's interesting, we've been consistent in this approach. Mr. Trudeau has tried to divide people on fundamental questions of health. It came out that his chief human resources officer actually had the same position that I did, and Mr. Trudeau covered up that advice and guidance in the middle of an election. Vaccines are safe and effective for use, and I encourage as many people as possible to get vaccinated, and we have to inform and educate people, not try and force and divide.
Ce sera la dernière question. This will be the last question.
Mr. O'Toole, Mike Lecouture with Global National. Ahead of the anniversary, so to speak, of 1,000 days of detention of the two Michaels, would you consider a prisoner swap with China in exchange for Ms. Meng?
I'll consider Magnitsky sanctions against Chinese leaders who have been holding our citizens for almost 1,000 days as diplomatic hostages. Mr. Trudeau has not taken this situation seriously, and I think about the families of the two Michaels most days. And we need a serious approach with respect to China. Mr. Trudeau's early fawning and close ties has only set Canada back, particularly with our allies. So Canada needs to stand up for our citizens, our values, and our security. That is what I will do as Prime Minister.
So besides Magnitsky sanctions, if you're elected on September 20th, what is your first step to actually bring the two Michaels home?
My first step is a reset in the relationship between Canada and China. They will know that a Prime Minister will take our interests seriously and always put our national interests ahead of the narrow interests of Mr. Trudeau and a few corporate interests. And I think a stronger Canada on the world stage will actually have our allies work closer with us on the situation with the two Michaels, on calling out the genocide against the Uyghur population, which the Conservatives brought forward and Mr. Trudeau skipped the vote for a human rights issue, the situation in Hong Kong, where we have 300,000 Canadian citizens today. We need to work with our closest allies to have a counterbalance to the communist regime in China to make sure that we stand up for our values, our citizens, and our interests.
Ce sera tout pour aujourd'hui. It'll be all for today. Merci. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
I'm going to start with an opening remark, and then I'm going to welcome your questions. My team and I looked over the recent data and the recent information released around the modeling for the fourth wave. We are in a fourth wave. It's very, very clear. And so I have a very serious message I want to deliver. I want, first of all, everyone to know that times could get really bad. Things could get really serious. And the single most important thing that everyone can do right now is to get vaccinated. And I want to speak directly to young people. I myself am someone, before the pandemic, I would say, oh, it's a cold, I'm fine. I have a little bit of a fever, no big deal. I would always minimize things and say, I'm tough, I'm fine, I'm not going to get sick. Or even if I'm a little bit sick, it's no big deal. I would say that all the time. Friends who know me that I would never admit, I don't even say the word I'm sick. That's what I used to say. I would be like, oh, I'm not, I just have a minor malfunction. I wouldn't even admit when I was actually legitimately having a fever or I was sick. I wouldn't admit it because I wanted to be tough. I got vaccinated. I 100% got vaccinated. I got 2 vaccines. We showed it to the world. My wife and I got vaccinated because we know it's important. This is serious. This is serious stuff. You got to get vaccinated. You might be young, you might be healthy, but we do not know that you're going to be protected just because you're young and healthy. And more than that, we know maybe you might be okay, but getting vaccinated will prevent the spread. It helps reduce the spread. So getting vaccinated means you are saving someone else. Maybe a loved one who's vulnerable. Maybe a kid that's in your family, a young one in your family who can't get vaccinated. It would be a horrible thing to happen to anybody. I would never want this to happen to anybody. But the heartbreaking feeling of knowing that you didn't get vaccinated and that could have saved a life, that is heartbreaking. That would be horrible. And that's what we're seeing right now. All the data is showing the people that are getting sick are people that are not vaccinated. So get vaccinated. Do it for yourself and do it for the people that you love. It would make a huge difference. The second thing I want to talk to you about, and this is really important, I want you to hear this. Right now, every single political leader agrees about getting vaccinated. You know me. I have criticized Mr. Trudeau again and again, and I will not hesitate to do it in the future. I have criticized Mr. O'Toole again and again and called him out. I will not hesitate to do that in the future. On vaccination, we all agree. There is no divide here. Do not listen to anyone who tries to divide you on where you vote. It does not matter where you vote. You can vote for me or not. I don't care. I want you to get vaccinated. Mr. O'Toole wants you to get vaccinated. Mr. Trudeau wants you to get vaccinated. There is no difference. Every major political party leader wants you to get vaccinated. Every nurse and doctor that you trust when you get sick, they want you to get vaccinated. Every frontline healthcare worker wants you to get vaccinated. There is no disagreement on this. The evidence and the science and the experts and the political leaders all agree. Get vaccinated. That is what you can do. That is what you need to do. The information that we're looking at right now is serious, but the hope of all of this, the hope in all of this is that you can get vaccinated. It is simple, and just doing that alone will save lives. So please, get vaccinated. It is safe. It is important. It is the most important thing you can do to help us fight this COVID-19 pandemic, and it will keep people safe. Donc, je veux ajouter en français 2 éléments. Premièrement, on a vu les chiffres de la 4e vague de la COVID-19 et premièrement, on est dans une 4e vague de COVID-19, c'est clair. Et ce qu'on doit faire à ce moment, c'est de soi vacciner. Moi, je peux dire personnellement, j'étais quelqu'un qui n'a jamais voulu admettre que j'étais malade. Parce que j'ai pensé, oh non, je suis fort, je ne dois pas admettre que j'ai tombé malade. J'ai pris le vaccin, j'étais vacciné. C'est important d'être vacciné. Pour les jeunes, je comprends que vous pensiez peut-être que vous ne tombez pas malade. On ne sait pas qui va tomber malade, on ne sait pas qui va avoir des réactions négatives à la COVID-19, donc sois vacciné. Et aussi, ça peut sauver des vies. Peut-être que vous êtes d'accord, vous êtes en santé, mais on sait que les enfants de moins de 12 ans ne peuvent pas être vaccinés. Vous pouvez sauver les vies d'un enfant ou de quelqu'un d'autre, donc sois vacciné. Deuxièmement et finalement, tous les chefs de parti sont d'accord qu'on doit être vacciné. J'ai critiqué M. Trudeau et je vais continuer de le faire où il fait des erreurs. J'ai déjà critiqué et je vais continuer de critiquer M. O'Toole parce qu'on n'est pas d'accord sur les valeurs de santé publique. Mais nous sommes tous d'accord qu'on doit être vaccinés. Tous les chefs sont d'accord, tous les médecins sont d'accord, tous les infirmières et infirmiers sont d'accord, tous les travailleurs de première ligne sont d'accord, tous les experts sont d'accord. On doit être vacciné, donc sois vacciné. Merci beaucoup.
Bonjour, M. Singh, Sébastien Desrosiers de Radio-Canada. Une première question d'abord sur votre plateforme pour le Québec. M. Trudeau, un peu plus tôt aujourd'hui, a déploré que cette plateforme n'ait pas été dévoilée plus tôt. Il aurait aimé débattre de ces idées-là hier soir dans le premier débat télévisé en français. pourquoi avoir attendu à ce moment-ci, à la 20e journée de la campagne pour la dévoiler et pas, par exemple, à votre première visite au Québec?
Nos valeurs au Québec sont claires. On a déjà montré à plusieurs reprises comment on est pour la langue française, la protection de la langue française, comment on est pour les droits du Québec, le droit de retraite avec plein de compensations pour tous les programmes fédéraux. Donc, ce ne sont pas un surpris qu'on est pour le Québec et on a dévoilé notre plan aujourd'hui et on est fiers de ça. Mais on a eu la chance de débattre notre vision pour le pays. Et une grande question qui est claire, et on a posé cette question à Justin Trudeau et il a dit ce qu'on a déjà su, qu'il n'est pas prêt à faire payer le juste part des ultra-riches. Il a voté contre notre motion pour faire payer le juste part des ultra-riches. Et ça veut dire qu'il va couper l'aide aux gens, ce qu'il a déjà commencé avec la coupure de $800 par mois de la PCRE. Et il va aussi augmenter la pression sur les épaules des travailleurs et travailleuses. Vous avez un choix dans cette élection. Les néo-démocrates vont s'assurer que les compagnies comme Amazon payent le juste part pour investir dans les gens.
Et je reviens sur une question que je vous ai posée un peu plus tôt. Sur les armes d'assaut, le Parti conservateur a clarifié sa position aujourd'hui, disant qu'il voulait interdire la possession d'armes d'assaut, mais M. O'Toole ne s'engage pas à financer un programme de rachat. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ça et est-ce que vous vous engagez à financer un tel programme?
Les libéraux ont promis d'avoir un programme de rachat. C'est ce que la communauté a voulu. On sait que les attentats, les massacres qui étaient perpétués avec des armes d'assaut continuent d'avoir des blessures dans la communauté. La douleur continue. Donc, on doit protéger la population. Et pour nous, c'est un programme de vraiment interdire les armes d'assaut. Et les libéraux n'ont pas le fait. On est prêt de le faire.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. I want to follow up on last night in the debate. We're talking about firearms and assault rifles. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole seemed to say he would still uphold the ban for assault rifles in Canada, but in his platform, as the Prime Minister, or excuse me, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau kept bringing up, that on page 90 they would repeal the order in council that brought that ban in. So, what do you think the Conservative plan is here for assault rifles?
I think it is fair to say their plan is not very clear. But it's also fair to say that Mr. Trudeau's plan didn't really respond to what the community had been asking for. Many people had said that we needed to clearly ban assault weapons, and to do that, it would require a buyback program. That's what community members had asked for. Given the massacres we've seen in the Quebec City, the massacres we've seen here in Quebec in Polytechnique, people want to see a real clear approach to making sure these weapons are off the streets. That's what we believe needs to happen, and we're ready to do that.
Given this modeling update that we've had from Federal Public Health, the Chief Public Health Officer today, are you planning to make any changes to the safety protocols in your campaign?
Thank you very much. We're reviewing that right now. Our team is going over that. We had already put a plan in place that if there was an increase in numbers, that we would be able to change the way we conduct this campaign. And so we're looking at new protocols now, given that modeling, and we'll advise you all as soon as we have those new protocols. But we're absolutely monitoring very carefully, and we're always looking for ways to be safer and to be better in terms of how we can keep people safe. And we'll be looking at this modeling and then looking at what we can do differently. So we'll give you an update about what that means.
In French, please. Oh, sorry.
Donc, après l'information partagée par les experts en matière de santé, on va réévaluer comment on fait la campagne. On a déjà dit que on avait un plan secondaire pour cette potentialité si les chiffres augmentent de continuer la campagne dans une manière différente. Donc, on a déjà planifié cette option et avec les nouvelles sortant aujourd'hui, on va réévaluer comment on fait notre campagne pour avoir des protocoles différents et on va les partager quand on a décidé c'est quoi les différents, c'est quoi les approches différentes.
Hi, Mr. Singh, Abigail Beeman, Global News. On the new modeling today, I'd like your thoughts on hearing Dr. Tam present a critical message, talking about a moment of crisis after having not addressed Canadians live for the past 3 weeks during this election campaign. Do you think there's a disconnect there? And what do you think about not having had those updates for these previous few weeks if we're in such a dire situation?
I don't know why there weren't updates and why those updates couldn't have continued. So I can't speak to why that happened or what the decision was around that. But things are really troubling given what we've just read and what we've just learned. And so I think we need to have regular updates so that Canadians are aware of what's going on and the potential risks that we're up against. I think people need to know. But again, I reiterate what the take-home message, the clearest message that Dr. Tam and others have expressed is that we need to get everyone vaccinated. So if you know someone that wants to get vaccinated but they don't know how to, please help them out. If someone needs a ride or needs help to get vaccinated, please help them out. And if you yourself are not sure and have some questions, ask those questions. Ask a qualified healthcare provider. Ask someone that you would trust if you got seriously sick. Ask that person what they would do. And that healthcare provider, I guarantee you, will tell you to get vaccinated. So please get vaccinated.
I'd also like to ask you about the timing of your Quebec platform to follow up on my colleague's question. You were in Quebec for 3 days. You could have dropped that platform before the debate and then had a chance to debate on it. The materials were given to journalists under embargo about 25 minutes before you spoke. It seemed pretty last minute. What is the strategy with dropping it, before you leave the province?
Our values are very clear. We've been really clear on where we stand, so it should come as no surprise that we've got a clear plan for Quebec. We wanted to make sure we had a plan that responded to some of the different elements of the pandemic and some of the increased urgency around the climate crisis. But folks know where we stand. We believe very strongly in defending the French language, defending culture here in Quebec. And we've always said, based on our Sherbrooke Declaration, as brought in by Jack Layton, that we believe in asymmetric federalism, which recognizes the rights of Quebec, and that Quebec has the right to withdraw from federal programs with full compensation. So those are always been our values, and they're things that we've always believed in.
Hi, Mr. Singh, Nick Boisvert with CBC. Professor at Simon Fraser University analyzed each of the parties' climate platforms and put that study out today. He found the Liberals was the most effective and the least costly, and the NDP was ranked fourth behind the Liberals, Conservatives, and the Greens. And if I can quote something from there, he said that your plan was very costly and largely ineffective and unnecessarily costly as well. How do you respond to criticisms that your climate plan won't do what you say it will?
We'll just look at the track record of Mr. Trudeau and what he's done in the past 6 years. We don't really need to look at any hypotheticals. We've got the evidence. He promised to end fossil fuel subsidies and instead increased them by $900 million a year. He put in a price on pollution that exempts the biggest polluters. He set targets and missed every single one of them. He talks a lot about the environment being really important, but has the worst record of any leader of any G7 nation in terms of emissions. He is the only leader whose emissions have gone up every single year since he's been in power. So really, how can Canadians believe that Justin Trudeau is going to do anything different now? We've laid out some concrete things we would do. We are not afraid to take on the biggest polluters. We would end fossil fuel subsidies. We would invest in clean transportation, renewable energy, and retrofitting homes and buildings. We want to fight this climate crisis. We are dedicated to fighting it. And we will do everything we can, listen to experts, and hear their advice and hear their opinions in improving our plan. But we know certainly that with 6 years in office, Mr. Trudeau has not done what's needed to fight this climate crisis.
When you have at least one expert, though, in this case, saying that your plan is no good, basically, that it's got ideas that are going to just be too expensive to actually pull off, Do you need to rein in some of these things? Do you need to get more costing on what you're trying to do? How do you think you can appeal to people like this who have expertise, who say you're not on the right track?
We've consulted with experts, and they believe our plan is a good plan, and they believe our plan will work. But we're always open to hearing better ideas and looking at ways to improve, and so I'm always open to that. I think that's very important. We are open to suggestions around how we can do a better job. But let's be clear, the choice is between Justin Trudeau, who has failed miserably with 6 years in power. He has failed you. He has failed to fight this climate crisis. He has made things worse. What is the most urgent crisis of our generation, he has abysmally failed. We believe that we need to do better, and we are committed to doing better. Merci, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. You've run for office a few times, and should we be shirking our responsibilities to the globe, to global issues, and to human rights, both at home and overseas, just because we want to have grab at power and have an election?
That's a very good question. I am not convinced that, let's say, the last 3 weeks or 5 weeks of conduct of the Canadian government is related to the election. My knowledge is that government is the governance layer, and then the operational layer answers to the minister, but there's a certain independence in how they execute their things, whether it's policing or military or all of the things. Let's say the operations of the government that the elected officials run on their own, except for accountability to the minister, and then the minister's accountability to the cabinet, and the cabinet's accountability as government to the crown. Remembering, of course, that even though we like to pretend it's not true, the real one and only accountability of government is to the Queen, rather than to voters, which is really weird, right?
Yeah.
Voters give mandate, but they give mandate to be accountable the way we want them to be accountable to someone else, right? In the formal structures of government under the Westminster system.
Right.
So now here we're talking about, so I think we want to separate out a little bit, let's say, the tactical decisions of the last 3 weeks. We have to separate those out from party politics. Because one thing is for certain, the Minister of Defense has no say today about what's happening tactically, because he is not actually the Minister of Defense.
Right.
There is a minister who's a caretaker minister to keep government running, because you need to have signatures sometimes and things like this. But government is running itself while this election is happening, I think, is the best way to interpret this. Now, what's happening to the big decisions? I mean, here we are, crisis. Taliban overruns the government of Afghanistan that we set up in order to try to democratize Afghanistan. Clearly the big question is, why did we democratize Afghanistan in the first place? Well, because that was in our best interest, right?
Yes.
Canadians like to think that our government does things for the greater good, but politicians all know that the greater good is very fluid, and that really let's say politicians work for the sentiment. Today, the greater good has a flavor, and in a year it'll have a different flavor, and in a decade it'll have a different flavor. And some of the things are immovable or very hard to move, and we enshrine those things in our legislation and in our human rights law and our civil rights law for other countries, right? And that's stuff solid, really solid, like, prohibition from discrimination on prohibited grounds in the context of employment or housing or services, which doesn't include any prohibition from discrimination in the context of politics, for example, right? You can do whatever you want in politics. You can incite a fascist uprising, to put in a dictator wannabe. Nothing stops us from doing that, and then they can ride the waves of hatred all the way to Parliament if the voters if the sentiment in the country wants it. Despicable as that would be, it's entirely not impossible to have something like that happen. But luckily, we have so many checks and balances that it would be very difficult.
Yeah.
And people would recognize it for what it is, and our transparent democratic processes would kick in, and people would walk away, right?
Right.
And therefore, it's self-governing, it's self-correcting, which stops, let's say, the more extremist parties from ever getting a credible voice. All they can do is punish the party adjacent to them or harass people. When I think of like the People's Party of Canada, for example,
yeah,
I am mindful that they are a party that has a zero chance of ever having a an elected official.
Yes.
Certainly zero chance of having a minority stake in the government. And absolutely, they will never, ever, ever, in my eyes, see a prime minister wearing their colors unless they completely change their ways.
Yeah, and that's comforting to hear. Having because we do sponsor a number of political events, especially when there's time, and having been in the room with them and seeing what they're like is like you whisper in the ear to the moderator of the event. It's like, do we have fascists in the room? And
yeah, so we
know, right?
Well, it's hard on the soul sometimes, because the price of having representation that looks like us means having representation that looks like other people. And representation that looks like other people includes people who think that, let's say, the likes of me or the likes of you or the likes of that other person over there, whoever that might be, that person is an abomination and that person should be prohibited from participating in society. And the thing about that hatred and politics and ethics and all those things is that you can't only have your way. If your way has to be allowed, then the rules that allow your way have to allow all the ways that still comply with the rules, right? And so the price of having, let's say, a divisive extreme left or extreme right crew going around and making awful accusatory claims and being terrible is the fact that they might be targeting you when they're doing that. And that could actually cause trouble. And I'm mindful of how, Maxime Bernier in the last election targeted me, like personally. He came after me multiple times on social media and in his communications. Of course, he was advised by a woman, Laurelyn Thompson, who was prolific in her anti-transgender activism, and she was whispering in his ears how, if he did a certain thing that would move mountains of people in his favor, and of course it did not. And it went nowhere. And so this time around, you really don't see that anymore. They've learned a harsh lesson, which is, when you're in the fringe, it's not necessarily a good idea to go after all of the fringe votes. Some of them are even fringier than your fringe.
Yeah, that's always a possibility, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But the downside was, I needed extra police security because of them. And right now, there's like some pretty transphobic politics happening in the US and in the UK, especially in Scotland right now. And then there's some interesting things around the conversion therapy bill that was happening in Canada. And once again, people are, targeting people like me because those are in context. And what I'm seeing is like a heightened, let's say, polarization and an increase in violence, and or let's say, violent sentiment.
Yeah.
So the harassment goes up, the threats go up, and so forth, because people push this because they're being polarizing, inflammatory, and deeply radicalized. And I'm thinking of one subject here, but actually this is on multiple subjects. We see this in the anti-Asian hatred that popped up around COVID vaccination, right? That's stuff that doesn't happen spontaneously. It was cultivated. People flamed those flames, right? They fed those flames. And now we see it with the really, really strong anti-vaxxer protests, really, really strong protests, right? Back to volatile, aggressive, hyperbolic statements, away from collegiate conversation about what the best or least bad option is, which is an interesting conversation, I'm sure, right?
Yes.
But you were talking about Afghanistan at the beginning, and
yeah, but you have gotten to some of the things that actually go on in Afghanistan when we talk about the People's Party, that they would agree with some of the policies of the Taliban in the fact of you and I would definitely be ostracized.
Right.
One for my clothing choices, and you for identifying with who you are. And shouldn't that be a basic right and freedom, though?
Well, it should be a basic right and freedom to be who you are or to dress who you are, and as a matter of fact, it is, and it's protected. And therefore, here you are protected from discrimination in your employment or in your housing and in services because of how you dress. And here I am enjoying the same enjoyment because of who I am. Also, we have, our identities are complex. So I'm an immigrant, I'm francophone, I'm a mom of 2 kids, I have, I have a truck, lots of things about me. Some of them are prohibited grounds of discrimination. Some of them are not. Someone could discriminate against me because they don't like, the kind of food I serve at home. That's not prohibited grounds of discrimination, unless it ties possibly to place of origin, you could say. But the thing about something though like the Taliban, let's say, to use an example that's fresh in our minds, and it's not widely known, but I was an activist against the Taliban in the 1990s. I was on, I volunteered in a cell with the women, RAWA, Revolutionary Association of Women of Afghanistan. The acronym is RAWA, RAWA. And I did online propaganda. Basically, I hosted the media, the video and the photos that related to the treatment of women and girls in Afghanistan under the Taliban during the more or less decade of Taliban rule. And when I think of the Taliban, they're basically, they're a puritanical theocracy, right? And they impose their views on others in disregard of human rights conventions, right?
Right.
We have a number of human rights conventions, and that's what they do. And that's where human rights, like that line, the whole world. Even Afghanistan, I believe, was a signatory to the Human Rights Convention. I'm not 100% sure, but they're certainly part of the body that implemented the United Nations Human Rights Convention. And I admit I don't know if Afghanistan signed up to CEDAW, the Convention on Equality of Women.
Yeah. Well, I do know this much, that they did because they were reminded of this in the UN has reported cases of torture in Afghanistan, and the Taliban was actually reminded of the fact that it does go against conventions held within the UN that are anti-torture statements, and they were, of course, reminded that they did agree to this. So somewhere along the line, they actually did agree to it, and they did agree to certain conventions held within the UN. But like you said, I'm not exactly sure of what all of them were. So
I'd have to look them up to see where they are.
Yeah.
But it's clear that they do not adhere to the conventions, right?
Correct.
And so now Canada was part of an endeavor to rid Afghanistan of the Taliban, and then to rebuild Afghan structures and infrastructure and institutions, and then to hand over Afghanistan to its masters, aka Afghans, and to bring in, an improvement in the situation of the rule of law and of human rights in Afghanistan, in particular for women and girls. I mean, nobody's even talking about queer people in Afghanistan, right? That's not even on the menu.
I would think they're probably hidden so far underground at this point in Afghanistan that the best thing to do is get them out and be done with it.
Absolutely. And then, and in all of this, of course, the cost of doing the work was high, right? People died. Many people died. And it turned out that it wasn't just the Taliban that was against international presence in Afghanistan and the ideas the international presence was bringing. It was a significant proportion of Afghanistan, like Afghans themselves, that were in that situation. And those people, there's a significant number of them that were against the idea of a foreign force, foreign influence, the outsider coming in and telling you what to do. But there is another significant fraction of the country that simply did not want to see the changes come in. They're perfectly happy being warlords or regional lords with quasi-absolute power over their people, and specifically control of their women and girls. And Canada and these other countries simply did not have the stomach to pay the price of dealing with this, right? Ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why our country did not have the stomach for this is because Canadians did not have the stomach for this, right?
Yeah.
Strategically and long term, governments make decisions that reflect the will of Canadians. Politics is a reflection of sentiment, and there's no such thing as forcing politics on a country that doesn't want those things to happen. The country wants these things to happen. The voters want it to happen. Governments do not do things that are not popular with voters. They get unelected very fast when that happens. And so Canada's decision to leave the UN was a function of the Canadian population's lack of stomach for the cost of having people there. And I understand where that comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But and we'd like to have the fantasy that the Afghan army and the Afghan government were going to be able to withstand the Taliban. But unless we had set them up to succeed, we had set them up to fail, and then we left. And so, I think we won't know for decades whether our governments already knew what was going to happen. It really seems like the governments that were there were left unaware, or at least that they weren't ready for what was going to happen.
That's the story they're saying, that they weren't prepared
what we're hearing
to see
today.
what happened.
Like, they didn't see it coming so fast. So basically, they thought it would be a slow collapse, not a fast collapse, or that there was some middle ground somewhere. But from the look of it, they just didn't understand. Like every other country that has ever interfered in Afghanistan, because I think it's important to remember that Afghanistan has one little gold star going its way. No invader has ever succeeded in Afghanistan, from what I remember. In the last 1,000 years, it's been constant turmoil. And to think that we could just go in there, fix it, and walk away was delusion of the highest level. We couldn't have done that. It would have taken decades. Decades there, slowly changing society, possibly 1 or 2 generations, and we didn't have the stomach for this.
Yeah.
But we pretended that it was not going to be needed. Because that's what politics is, right? And the reason why that is, I mean, politician that I am with experience that I am, those promises were made because that's the promises Canadians wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And therefore they were made. And we all went into there pretending that the situation was different than it really was. And that's not okay, right? I mean, that's on us. All of us together.
Yes.
And now here we are walking away from Afghanistan, and you brought up this question about what we owe other countries, what we owe Afghans. I think it's fair to say that we owe Afghan not setting them up for catastrophe on an individual basis.
Yeah.
I think, I work at the international scale a lot. I am very mindful about how, unless you have something to trade with another country, they don't have any reason to agree to what you'd like them to agree to. You can buy agreement or you can force agreement. There's no alternative at the international scale. And we are now in a situation where we have a country full of people whose lives are going to be rolled back into the Stone Age, or maybe I should be less unkind, to the 18th century of the interpretation of the law according to very old religious texts. And that population was fooled by our representatives to believe that we were going to make that never ever happen again. And I think that's where we did something terrible.
Yeah.
Because it's impossible to pull out everybody from Afghanistan. What are we going to do? Pull out all Afghan women? Is this what we're going to do, right? Like, how are we going to address this? There's no addressing this horrible situation except cajoling the Taliban into being our friend or being somebody's friend, and to, let's say, anneal their behavior. And what do we do? Like, to a patriarchal dictatorship, let's go, a patriarchal theocracy, to be less oppressive? Could you be a little bit less oppressive, please? It's not pretty. That's like, where do we go with this? It's awful.
Yeah. That's the whole thing. Maybe it's best that we just accept and befriend the government so that at least we can have some working agreements with them and be able to get things that are needed in there, such as medications and food, rather than trying to force them to be something that they don't want to be.
Right. So before Afghanistan was propped up by Pakistan and by Iran, and they provided those things when, or a certain level of such things. So then you find yourself in this situation of what can we hope for? We can hope to have Pakistan become a poor Saudi Arabia, let's say, because they don't have a lot to offer back. So is the model Saudi Arabia, or is the model more like Yemen? I think this is going to emerge. And I hate to say it. And I was giving some advice to someone based on my experience with queer refugees and trying to get queer refugees out. And the advice was about what options exist to get Afghan women and their families out of Afghanistan. So people who have the luxury of having some contacts in Canada, like how to get these people into Canada, and the situation is bleak. It's exceedingly bleak because it's so difficult to get out of a country that's in the situation that Afghanistan is, especially if you're a woman or if you're queer. they murdered the Taliban murdered a gay man that made the news just yesterday or the day before. It's terrible. It's a terrible situation.
Yeah.
And we would like to think as a country that we follow through with our promises. And I'm appalled that Canada did not follow through with this. And that we ran away, we walked away from a situation. And I have to be honest, it could entirely be that Canada wasn't able to have agency on walking away or not, because the situation was such that, because we're not a major military partner and we're not an infinite source of funding, that we went as far as we could go. I don't know why Canada chose to not follow through. Probably they recognized that they had already lost. I would expect that strategically, the people who think about the matter realized that they had lost this, and that it was time to get out now.
Yeah, that could
And
be
so they got out.
could be bottom line.
Yeah,
it was by
and it's
admitting the
awful.
loss, we save lives.
And if that's the case, then what the heck did they do, leaving all those people behind to whom they had commitments? Because it's really un-Canadian, I'll say. I don't know what other words to use here. It's appalling to think that we asked people to help us do work. And in doing so, we basically put a target on their back as, in a potential Taliban society. And then when the time came when we knew it was time to leave, we decided not to help them get out of the environment. We left them to their own struggles. If this is what really happened, whoever made those decisions should answer for them, because that is profoundly unethical and disturbingly pragmatic to do something like this.
Okay, so we're going to leave it there. What are some of the best organizations that you are involved with and people should work with for human rights?
Human rights organizations. Well, that's complicated. That's pretty complicated. So there's, I'm pulling up my Twitter here. The Canadian Anti-Hate Network does good work. They do good work. Mm-hmm. They write policy papers. They do good work. If you're in a union, if a person is as part of the labor movement, the unions and the inter-union organizations do excellent human rights work. All political or quasi-political bodies have shortcomings, of course, mm-hmm. But let's say the policy work that the unions do is really impressive.
Yeah.
Oh, what's happening? I'm sorry. If you'll bear with me for a second. My computer is making noise. I would say those two. So those two roadways. The Morganne Oger Foundation is always looking for help. So I encourage people to call us and help us. We're always looking for policy work and so forth. There's the CCPA, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Does excellent work. And then, there's the cases and the lawyers, and there's the incidents that are happening. Grassroots organizations are doing really good work as well. But it's always important with grassroots organizations to be a little bit, always to be careful. There's a diverse quality there.
Right.
And the Morganne Oger Foundation is involved with an organization which is called Dignity Network Canada. I'm checking. Yeah, Dignity Network Canada. We're a member of Dignity Network, and we work on international human rights, focused on the LGBTQ2IA plus communities worldwide, and we are. It's an organization of organizations, and it's essentially on trying to bring SOGI justice to people in countries that don't have access to those human rights.
Cool. You do great
work.
work.
I think, thank you very much. That's where I'll leave that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people can get behind policy. They can take a time to write their MP or their MLA letter on a human rights matter that they care about and explain why they care. It means a lot to write those letters.
Yeah.
They really do actually pay attention.
After all, we voted for them, and they don't want to get voted back out, as we said earlier.
All right.
So thank you so much for today. So, and let's thank everybody for listening, and we will talk to you later.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, and have a
listen today, and thank you for supporting us with our sponsors. Please go to depictions.media for more information and click on our contact link and let us know how we can help bring your story and help bring us to a better world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.